So hopefully you can all see my screen here. This looks very boring, I know, but what we're gonna do today is we're actually gonna build a few pieces in TouchDesigner that help us control OBS. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Open Broadcaster software, this is what that application looks like. And this is used for all sorts of things these days on the web when it comes to streaming. OBS is a kind of portal that lets you create, arrange, and put together a lot of different streaming pieces that you might do, as well as doing a bunch of screen recording. So I find that many people are using OBS these days to not only control streams that go to Twitch or go to YouTube Live or go to Facebook Live, but they're also using it as a part of their production workflow and pipeline. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different kind of pipeline options that you might encounter and or think about. The challenge with OBS, and you've probably had this experience yourself if you've ever tried to operate two pieces of software at the same time, is that if you're trying to do something in TouchDesigner and then you're trying to do something in OBS and you're going back and forth, then you can often find yourself trying to figure out which button you're trying to click where and trying to keep track of two different pieces of software that you're controlling simultaneously. And today what we're going to look at is how can we use TouchDesigner to talk directly to OBS to remotely control a number of the features that we might want to actually use from one single application. And that could be everything from starting and stopping our streaming to starting and stopping our recording, even to changing our scenes and changing our audio mixer. So that's some of the pieces that we're going to pull apart and demystify a little bit today. And we're going to use WebSockets in order to do that. Before we get too deep into how to make all of those pieces work on OBS and what are WebSockets and all of those elements, I want to take a quick moment just to kind of look at some kind of typical streaming style arrangements. This isn't a comprehensive list. There's lots of different ways to kind of think about how you might arrange your streaming profile or how you're going to collect video and then stream it out to the web. But these are some of the ones that I've encountered so far, both in the work that I've been doing and in the work that I've done in advising other people and talking with other students and professionals. So some of those ideas end up looking like this. So in one iteration, we have a single server. So we've got one computer, and you're just using TouchDesigner to stream something directly to the internet. And that's not a crazy thing to do. The video stream out top makes it easy to do that, to stream directly to Twitch, Facebook, YouTube Live, anything that has an RTSP stream URL that you can use. And this isn't an uncommon way to work. If you're putting together some kind of virtual production or you're just streaming single video, this might be a lovely way to kind of think about how you can take your artwork and then get it onto one of those platforms really easily and simply. The challenge that you might run into here is that this is really only one application that you're using. It's just TouchDesigner. It goes to your router or probably to your internet provider, and then you stream it out to the cloud. So that's great. I love that. But you might also find that you want to do something like save your image or save your video to disk. And you can certainly do that directly from TouchDesigner also. The benefit of doing that through something like OBS is that rather than having TouchDesigner do both the work of compressing your video, getting it ready to stream to the internet and save it, you've now kind of offloaded that responsibility. So TouchDesigner is really only doing the visuals work that you're trying to do. You send that video over to OBS, and then OBS is responsible both for saving that file to disk and then also streaming it to the web. There are a number of different kind of plugins and handles for OBS that help here as well, that make it really easy to connect to Twitch, YouTube, Facebook Live, as well as manage the chat and interactive pieces of that from a single application. So there are some benefits to kind of thinking about starting to break up your production stream. The other benefit to kind of separating out your responsibilities in terms of your computer is to know that in making this kind of decoupling, separating the kind of rendering of the video and the visuals from the streaming and recording, it means that if something went really wrong and if TouchDesigner crashed for some reason, then your stream wouldn't go down. Your stream would stay up and you would still have a chance to kind of recover, do some disaster recovery, restart TouchDesigner, and get your stream back up and running again. And when you're starting to think about how you can make your setup or your production kind of battle tested and kind of ready for disaster, not that disaster is going to strike, but fingers crossed, in case it does, it's always good that we're prepared for how to handle those situations. So this is another kind of prototypical kind of idea for how you might think about working with OBS. Now, you can do much more complicated setups. And if you're doing a kind of self-streamed VJ show where you had both, visuals as well as audio that you're working with and either a webcam or another camera interface, rather than trying to do all of that work inside of TouchDesigner, you might instead let OBS do some of that compositing and arranging work. And we'll see in a little bit how OBS can kind of create its own scenes, so you can do some kind of layers and transitions with OBS so that you can kind of offload some of that work. That lets TouchDesigner really focus on doing the work that TouchDesigner is really good at, rather than trying to do all of the mechanics of running your installation or your stream in addition to making the visuals. So you could certainly write, another option would be to run another instance of TouchDesigner, which many of us have done before. The benefit of using something like OBS is that this application is already kind of built to do exactly these things. So we can take advantage of all of the features that are already made and already kind of battle tested, so we don't have to build that ourselves. In this setup, we still live in a world where all of this is still happening on one single computer. So there's kind of one computer that's responsible for doing all of these different things. We're going to send it out to our network switch, to our router, whatever your networking infrastructure is. And then from there, we actually go to the web. Another way that we might think about using OBS in this particular environment is to couple that with something like OBS Ninja. If you haven't heard of OBS Ninja is a mechanism for being able to collect video streams or screencast scenes from other people. So it's kind of a Zoom kind of setup where I send you a link, you join that link, and then in a browser, I can see either your webcam or your desktop, and then I can actually grab that stream also. Now, this kind of setup can be really helpful for situations where you're doing any kind of virtual conference, or you're trying to orchestrate many different people that are located lots of different places, and you want to collect all their streams together in order to put together some kind of online event. Now, in those situations, OBS becomes really handy because OBS is our kind of tool for gathering all of those streams together, and we can kind of arrange them in one big canvas that we can then pass along to TouchDesigner. And TouchDesigner can do the work of cutting up that canvas, separating it into the individual videos, and then gives us the ability to kind of rearrange and dynamically create scenes and events. I've seen this kind of setup in not actually infrequently, especially for kind of theatrical productions. So Zoom can be a really excellent platform for doing some of this, but there are a few challenges with Zoom in terms of the arrangement of your participants, how you handle audio, a number of different challenging pieces that can be a little bit cumbersome to work around. The same thing with Skype and with some other kind of video streaming platforms. OBS Ninja really gives us the kind of toolkit for being able to pull those streams in individually and then control them in OBS. So OBS kind of catches all of our video, hands it over to TouchDesigner, and then TouchDesigner does the streaming itself. So this is kind of similar to our very first example, just with the slight change that we're now kind of gathering all of our video before passing it to Touch. You might suspect that another iteration of this looks like we're going to use OBS to both gather all of our streams. We're going to transform that video or kind of build our conference or virtual conference in TouchDesigner, and then we're going to use OBS again to actually do the streaming. And this is great, especially if you're trying to stream to multiple platforms simultaneously. You want to stream to Twitch, to Facebook, to YouTube. Rather than trying to set up all of that and manage all of that in TouchDesigner, and then what if TouchDesigner crashes? You need to have a kind of disaster recovery plan again. You hand off all that responsibility to OBS to really manage all of those streams and pieces. Again, the next slide is going to look really familiar in the same kind of idea where we not only want to stream our scene or stream our conference or our virtual performance or production, but we also want to save it to disk. And this is where it becomes really helpful to start to break up responsibilities and tasks, trying to get one application to do both kind of all of the video gathering and then all of the slicing and all the audio mixing and the recording and the streaming. At some point, you're going to run into some challenge there. And so this becomes a really important kind of time to start thinking about as your project gets more complicated. How are you going to break up those responsibilities and kind of shuffle them to the right application to kind of handle its little siloed responsibility? All of this still runs on one single server, which is still an okay way to do all of this. But you might find that as your project gets more and more complex or has more and more kind of compute resources and requirements, you might want to offload some of this responsibility to another computer. And in this kind of scenario, that's exactly what we're doing. You have one computer or one server that's just responsible for kind of capturing the video or the outside video sources, arranging them into a canvas that we can cut up and arrange or transition between, using TouchDesigner to do actually the fun, kind of interactive or dynamic pieces of that, and then passing that as NDI through your network to another computer that's then just doing the work of saving it to disk and streaming it to YouTube. This is a kind of really excellent example for something to do with an old laptop that you have. Maybe you have a second laptop, or you have that MacBook that's got replaced, you got an upgrade and it's still sitting in the corner. So what do you do with that machine that's just kind of sitting around and doesn't have a responsibility? Well, you can turn that into your streaming server, and its only job ever is just to record the video that you're creating, and then stream it out to the network. This is kind of where things begin to get a little more complicated, but this is also if you're starting to think about how do I build a home studio setup, or how do I work with kind of putting together a remote production or a virtual production. These are the types of considerations that you've got to start to kind of manage and wrangle and think about, because it's really easy to end up with a lot of video streams simultaneously, and then all of a sudden it's too much work for one computer to do it. So what do you do? And kind of breaking up those responsibilities across hardware is one of the directions you can move. The final example that I would suggest here, and this is another kind of scenario where maybe you've got lots of different applications that are running. You've got a kind of LAN party style setup where one person has got a TouchDesigner scene, someone else has made something with Notch, someone else has made something with Unreal and with Unity. And what you want to do is kind of put on a big virtual production. You want to capture all of those things in OBS, and OBS is going to be responsible not only for saving them to disk, but then also getting those out to the internet. And this is a kind of setup where, especially if you're doing some more kind of like larger interactive experience or working with lots of different artists, they might all have their own machines, and it might be too complicated to try and organize it just to one computer. So how can you start to think about that responsibility or the reality of lots of computers, and you need to kind of gather all the video from them and then get them streamed out to the network? So why do we care about WebSockets and all of this, and why would that even matter? And the reason all of that matters is that as soon as we've got OBS here on another computer, or even if it's on the same computer, how do we get TouchDesigner to be able to control these two other applications that are running? Because in a perfect world, I want to be able to be making my visuals in Touch or making my kind of creative experience. And I want to be able to start and stop my streaming or change my scenes. I don't want to have to think about trying to find the right monitor and click the right button, especially if we're right in the middle of an online show. So what we're going to look at is how do we get kind of remote control of these two pieces from a single application. And that's exactly the kind of solution that WebSockets are going to create for us in this particular place. So I know that's a lot of kind of information here to get us started. All of these slides that I created to kind of talk about this, these are all available inside of our repo. So I'm going to take just one moment as a kind of quick reminder. The link for this, I'm going to share it here in the chat one more time. And I think this was also shared with you before the workshop. Thank you very much, TouchDesigner Study Weekend. So this not only has the materials from the whole project today, but it also has all of the links. And you can find that these slides are going to be located here in Assets. And then inside of Assets, these README images, oops, not README images, excuse me, slides. In our slides, there's examples of all of these different kinds of networking setups. So as you're starting to map out and think about how you might want to put together a show or put together an event, this kind of step of taking a little bit of time to really map out your signal flow and understand how that's broken across computers or broken across applications is a really important step. That's a little bit of planning that will help make sure that it's not nearly as stressful for you once you get to actually building your application and kind of doing the work that's the most fun and exciting. Whew. So before we kind of dive ahead here and keep moving, I want to take a quick moment and just make some space to see if there are any questions from all of you watching about these kinds of setups or why we might want to think about kind of breaking up these responsibilities. So this is a quick moment. We'll take just a few minutes here. I'll keep an eye on my chat over here to see if there are any questions about why this is important or how we might set this up or any of those pieces. I'll also mention that we're going to take some time to actually do a little bit of work in OBS. We're not going to do like a big OBS workshop today, but we are going to look at some of the pieces of how we set up OBS so TouchDesigner can talk to it. Cool. I'll wait a few minutes. It's a very strange experience. Normally when you're in person, I get to see all of your lovely faces. I can wander around. There's someone, I can, see if someone's question is waiting to be answered. And instead now I'll just wait patiently to see if there's any questions that show up here in the chat. Oh, what an excellent question. Is this a two-way communication system or is just a one-way communication system? So can we talk from OBS to TouchDesigner and TouchDesigner back to OBS, or do we only get it one direction? Luckily for us, WebSockets allow bidirectional communication. So this means that if we make changes in OBS, we'll get that message in TouchDesigner, and then we can send messages from TouchDesigner back to OBS. One of the kind of really cool things about WebSockets is that their messages travel both directions, and it runs over an HTTP protocol. This is kind of a lovely transition to what are WebSockets and what do we even care about WebSockets. WebSockets are a technology that are really helpful for communicating to the browser or to a browser's application, kind of to a web server. But we're finding, or I'm finding, that there are more and more applications that have some kind of WebSocket interface that comes along with them. So for example, Runway ML is a good example of an application that allows you to talk to it with WebSockets. OBS has a WebSocket plugin. There's kind of an increasing number of apps that rather than having something like OSC or kind of dedicated JSON protocol or UDP protocol, they use WebSockets. It's kind of built on existing web technologies and allows for some of those kind of typical communication needs that we run into all the time. The other handy thing to know here is that you have the option of having these messages being encrypted or unencrypted. So you can set up a kind of key to make sure that both parties know the secret. So if you were, for example, trying to set this up on a network that wasn't private and you wanted to make sure that someone wasn't going to be able to hijack your computer and hijack your stream, you can make sure that there's some additional kind of security implementation in there as well so that those kinds of things don't happen. Other questions here? very exciting for me to hang out and see if there are other questions. It's also okay if there aren't any questions. I just want to make sure that we don't just dive ahead without kind of making room for all of you to be able to say like, why does this really matter? And what do these things even look like anyway out in the world? Cool. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this set of slides. And I'm going to minimize our repo here. I'm going to take us back to just our README page. This also has a link here down towards the bottom, both to OBS and to our OBS WebSocket plugin that we're going to use. So there's some additional pieces here that we'll come back to in just a little bit. So before we kind of dive into working with OBS here too much, what I do want us to kind of take a moment to do is just to look at WebSockets generally and to look at the WebSocket DAT. We're not going to do too much complicated work here, but I think it is worth kind of taking some time to make sure that we understand some of the fundamental pieces that we're going to use all through this workshop. And that's always, my instinct is that we can kind of dive into the application of it really quickly. And I want to make sure that we kind of understand some of the fundamental pieces that are really essential for making sure that we've got a clean sense of why we have these tools, what these tools are good for, and how we might approach them. So let's go ahead. We're going to open up the op create dialog. We're going to look for the WebSocket DAT here. And we're going to go ahead and just drop that down in our network. I'm going to open up the parameters window over here. And our kind of default address that's set up is echo.websocket.org. And this is really handy. This is the websocket.org website is a great place to check out. And in fact, I'm going to take just a quick moment here to bounce us to this website. And I don't want to go to Echo. I just want to go websocket.org. This is, there's all sorts of handy information here for learning about WebSockets, kind of getting a handle on what WebSockets are good for. And on the demos page on this echoes test, here we can actually see some of the exact kinds of things that we're going to be looking at. So there's a whole kind of set of pseudocode here that's available for you to kind of work with, demo code, I should say. If you want to set this up yourself, and what we're going to do is we'll actually see exactly kind of this idea is that we're going to see how do we connect to our WebSocket server, how do we disconnect from it. If we connect to it, how do we send it a message? And what happens when we get our message back? In this case, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to send a message and our WebSocket DAT is going to show us the same message echoed back to us. That's kind of our way of knowing that the message was received and then bounced back so that we know that it got there. So we're essentially going to do this same exact idea, but we're just going to do it here in our WebSocket DAT. I'm going to go ahead and open up my WebSocket callbacks in another editor. And I'm going to do a quick check-in here to see how big, is this large enough for everyone to read? And I'll wait for just a moment for you to tell me if it needs to be bigger or if this is okay. Okay, looks like it's good so far. Excellent. So we have a few different methods that are available here to us. If you're new to callbacks, I'll just give us a kind of brief overview of callbacks as they work in TouchDesigner. What happens is that when something runs, when some code executes in this stat, our callback has a set of methods that are run in the particular circumstances that are described here. So this onConnect, when we've connected to our WebSocket server, we have a callback or we have an action that's run when that event happens. So if we need to do something special when we connect to our server, we have a way of knowing that we're connected. We also have a way of knowing if we got disconnected. So we're not going to explore these pieces too deeply today, but this can be really helpful if you're starting to think about how do I make sure that when TouchDesigner starts up and when I connect for the first time, maybe what I want to do is I want to pull OBS and I want to get a list of all of the scenes and all of the things that OBS has to update parameters in TouchDesigner. Well, we could use this on connect method to know that, okay, we're connected, and now I can ask for an update from OBS. Similarly, on disconnect, we might use something like this to be able to issue a warning to the user or change something in our UI that says, hey, check it out, we're disconnected from OBS, something's gone wrong. So these can be really helpful ways for us to know if we're connected and everything is ready to roll, or if we've gotten disconnected and something has gone terribly wrong. Similarly here, we've got an on-receive text. We're going to use this one a good bit. On-receive binary, so if we get information that's not text, but might be binary information. So what might this be? Well, we could think of like, we might get an image, or we might get a piece of geometry. We could get any sort of information that we might need to decode or do something with. And then we have this on-receive ping. So if we need to kind of set up a heartbeat system, this is how we think about doing some of those pieces as well. Okay, so let's actually see some of this in action. We're going to do the simplest pieces first. So the first element we're going to add here is we're just going to print that TD is connected. And now I'm going to open up my text port over here. In my WebSocket, I'm going to go ahead and reset my connection. And I can see that, sure enough, TD is connected. So our connection was established. Great. Let's do the same thing here. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it down here on disconnect. TD is disconnected. Okay. So now we get a message when we're connected. And if for whatever reason that connection was severed, TD is disconnected. So far so good. I love this. Everything is great here so far. How do we use our WebSockets to actually send a message though? That's what we're going to look at next. So let's go ahead and add a text stat. And let's go ahead next and bring this up to edit in a text port. We're going to use a variable to kind of hold our information. That's going to be really kind of useful for us in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a variable called MSG, or message. And here, let's just put in a little string, hello TDSW. Great. So I'm going to print that string out. This is my way of knowing that this is what I've sent, right? Similar to what we saw in our demo online. We can print that, hey, I sent this message. And then we can also print that we received a message. That's a great way to think about this. I'm going to use an F string for this. This is available in Python 3.7. So hopefully if you're using TouchDesigner 2020 27390, yes, that's the right number, 27390. Oh, F strings are a way of formatting messages that's a little bit more convenient. So that starts with an F instead of a kind of dot format. So F, this is something that I want to format. Our string is going to go inside of this. So I'm going to say, for example, that let's say sent, and then a pipe, and then in curly braces, this is where we can actually put a variable. So I'm going to put MSG in here. And what this is going to do, let's just run this script right now. And we'll see that if we run this, I can see that I sent hello world. Great. Now the fun part. So our operator that's called WebSocket1. It's important for you to spell things correctly. And the method that we're going to use is send text. And I'm going to send the text that's that message. So I should be able to run this. I sent this message. And then we can see here, I see the same message printed. And what showed up here is actually the echo of that message coming back to me. So that shows up as a row here in our WebSocket. So let's take a moment. Let's actually look at our callbacks next to see how we can not only see that we sent a message, but that we received a message. I'm going to clear my text port. I'm going to bring this back up. And let's add down here to our on receive text. let's print. We're going to use our f-string technique again. Received, R-E-C-E-I-V-E-D, bar, curly braces, message. So fingers crossed. What we should see happen here is we should see that when we run this, and let's clear this one more time. Run this. I sent hello TDSW and I received back TDSW. We're going to use this idea of what to do with the received message a whole lot in this workshop. So it's worth kind of thinking about and holding on to the idea that we're really going to use this callbacks mechanism for doing something with what we get back. And the reason that becomes really helpful and really powerful for us is that we'll be able to call that function every time we receive a message, which means that, you know, if you're using a dat execute or a table dat execute kind of situation, like how you parse and figure out which cell has changed and the contents of that cell, that's like a really messy way to kind of solve this problem. And this gives us a much kind of cleaner and concise way to know what to do this. The other piece that we're going to run into a healthy bit here is that while it would be lovely if we were just sending kind of raw strings around on the internet, chances are what we really want to think about is how to encapsulate and encode some of that information in a data structure that we can parse and do a little bit more work with. So I'm going to copy and paste my original text here, and let's make a few alterations to this. So instead of just message, well, actually, let's leave it as message. So I'm going to leave this as message, but instead I'm going to set up some curly braces. And I'm instead going to think that what I want to send is I want to send a JSON dictionary. I want to send a dictionary of information that's going to go out to the world. So the key that I'm going to put in here is payload. And if you're new to JSON, JSON is a data structure that's often used in JavaScript, but we can use the same kind of data structure in Python. And so in Python, we call them dictionaries. They're essentially the same thing. We treat them the same way, largely. And they're described as a set of curly braces. And inside of the curly braces, we have a key. So some value, some string value, colon. And what comes after the colon is the information that's attached to this key. So if I ask for payload, then I get whatever comes after this colon that's attached to payload. So in this case, I'm going to put hello world. Hello world. This is really helpful because this gives us some kind of clean descriptors of if I wanted to say just get this payload, or if I had lots of different things packed into this dictionary, I have a way of pulling out just those individual elements. And we'll see a whole lot of that when it comes to when we're working with OBS, because there's a kind of JSON data structure that comes back to us that way. Luckily for us, we shouldn't, fingers crossed, have to make any changes here. So let's save this. Let's come on over. I'm going to clear the contents here. Oops, not reset, pardon me. I'm going to clear my output, and I'm going to clear my tech support. And let's go ahead and I'm going to run my text too. I'm using Control R. I'm using the shortcut for this. You can also right click and select Run Script. So we should run this. Aha, so we sent this lovely little dictionary, and then we received it back. Easy peasy. Love it. It's beautiful. Now, what's worth knowing is that this came back to us as text. And let's actually do just like a quick little extra piece here. So let's go ahead and bring this up here. Yes. Let's restart that. And let's also print, I'm going to do a comma, and let's say type and message. Because I want to know the data type for the message that's come back to us. This is going to be really helpful, and is a really important place where we can get derailed really easily if we're not careful. So let's run this. Aha, so the type of message that we got back is a string. And that's valuable for us to know, because what we're going to end up doing here, if we want to do something with the contents of this, is that to parse that string in a reasonable way, we're going to actually need to convert that to JSON. And we can do that. We can kind of do that here in our callbacks up the top of our dat here. We could do something like import JSON. And then what I might do here is I'm going to give myself a new variable, jMessage, MSG. And I'm going to do JSON dumps. And I'm going to put that message right in here. And now I'm going to change these two to be my J. Oh, I need to spell that correctly. Ooh. There we go, jMessage. Let's copy, paste. I have a very grumpy cat, so if you hear mumbling and grumbling and meowing in the background, someone has brought their toy in here for me, and they're gonna want my attention in just a moment, so apologies if you hear some extra grumbling from the background. So let's go ahead and run our command here again. Aha, oh, let's make sure that we've spelled everything correctly. Okay. So now we should see, aha, that we've received this bit back, and it still says that our type is a class string. I think that we actually need JSON loads instead. Excuse me. Oh yeah, look at that. We got a great, a great grumble. And we probably got a great grumble because of the fact that we sent this as a string to begin with. So we're going to see why and exactly how all of this is a big mess, and what we can do to make sure that we kind of clean this up as we start to work with the OBS WebSockets themselves proper. Whew, great. Any questions here before we move on? There's some other pieces that I want us to make sure that we kind of take a little bit of time to kind of look at and get started with, especially when it comes to OBS. So I'll take a moment, I'll pause, see if there's anything else that all of you would like to get some information back from. Other questions? So far, so good. Before we move away from this, let's actually just take a moment to correctly format our sent message, because it's worth kind of taking a moment to make sure that we kind of understand exactly how that works. So if we want to send this kind of properly on the sending side, right? So here in our text2, we're going to also import JSON. And then we're going to take this message and we're going to, again, we can use this JMSG variable. And we're going to JSON. And in this case, we're going to dumps. We'll use JSON dumps to convert that, and JMessage, MSG. There we go. Now, hopefully we should see, aha. So indeed, we sent this little string over here, and we received back what looks like a string, but we actually correctly decoded that as a dictionary. And that's helpful. Why does that matter? That's helpful because now we can do stuff with all of the keys inside of that dictionary. Okay, so far so good. Hopefully none of you have burning questions just yet. Hopefully none of that is lighting you all on fire before we kind of move ahead here. The next pieces that we're going to pull apart before we kind of really dive into too much of this stuff is to try and get OBS set up and ready. So the pieces that you'll want to do, and I'll post the links for this, is that in addition to having having OBS installed, and if you haven't installed OBS just yet, this is a great time to go ahead and download and install OBS. I'll post a link here for you. OBS is free, it's open source. It's one of the really things that's great and awesome about it as a framework and tool is that it's not only free, but it does a lot of the things that we want to do. So you'll want to make sure that you both install OBS, and then we also need to install this plugin for WebSockets. And this plugin can be found here at this link. So you'll head to this page, you'll go to the download. There's all of the kind of fancy features that it lists here. And then you can go ahead and just grab the installer or the package file for Mac or for Linux, depending on what platform you're running. I would expect that you're probably not running Linux today, but it's worth knowing that, right, like in that configuration that we talked about, where you've got lots of different options, the machine that's actually doing all of the streaming doesn't necessarily have to be a Windows machine. It could be a Mac, it could be a Linux machine. That's one of the kind of interesting pieces here, is that you could break up your responsibilities across many different machines and make sure that you've kind of appropriately set them up the right way. Excellent. So kind of I'll quick check in here for all of you here in the workshop. Do you have OBS installed already, or do you need another minute or two to get OBS installed? Excellent. One person is installed and ready to go. Very exciting. I get to anxiously wait in anticipation, watching the chat. It's thrilling. Okay, excellent. All good, installed. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Excellent, excellent. Perfect. So it looks like we're on a pretty good pace here. When you open up OBS, what you should see is something that looks a little bit like this. I have some assets for us to use today, so we're not going to kind of start from scratch. Those, again, are going to be located here in our workshop, not that browser window, but this browser window. The assets that we'll be using are here in assets, and we have several different sizes. So depending on what kind of resolution you're working with or are experimenting with today, you could use the 1080, the 720, the 480. These are really all here for your convenience. You can use whichever size you'd like. We'll actually see how we can kind of scale them and move them around inside of OBS. I've also got those kind of already downloaded and ready to go. So I'm going to bring over another window that has those here already set up so we can see how this works. OBS has this kind of notion of an organization of scenes, which are a collection of sources. So we've started here with one scene by default is what we've got set up. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this. And I'm just going to call it I'm going to call it scene 1. Might as well. It's kind of simple and easy. So we've got scene 1 here, and then we've got a set of sources. So in sources, I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus button at the bottom. And then what I want to capture here is I'm going to go ahead and capture, I think I just want to capture an image here to start. And you'll see, I'm going to go back here for just a moment. You have lots of different options. So you could capture your browser, you could capture your desktop. If you've got something like an Elgato game capture or another kind of streaming device set up, you could capture directly from that device. You could do a slideshow, video, you can use an NDI source. You've got lots of different options for the types of content that you might bring in, as well as folders that you kind of organize all of those elements into kind of groups to make it easier to kind of sort out all of your media. I'm going to start with an image. I'm going to go ahead and call this image 1. I know, very descriptive and very exciting. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. And then I'm going to browse the location for that file. And because I've already got this set up, I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste my path in here. And I think what I want to work with is I want to work with these 1080 frames first. And I'm going to go ahead and grab, I think, this offline screen one. You can grab any that you like. Doesn't matter in this particular case. And I'll hit OK. This is great. I love this. So we've got one image here. Let's go ahead while we're doing this kind of setup work. Let's create another scene. So I'm going to go ahead and hit plus. Scene 2, again, very descriptive. I love it. And scene 2, let's go ahead and hit our plus button again for our sources. I'm going to similarly come down here to image. I'm going to call this image 2. I know. Again, wow, so fancy. I'm going to browse. And this time I'm going to go ahead and grab, I think, one of these up here. Feed from OBS. Great. Actually, I'm going to grab the blue one because I want to have a nice kind of clean difference. And I'll open that up. Okay, great. So now we can see I've got two scenes. Each scene has got its own image in it. And we should see that when I click on the scenes, right, what happens is that I get this nice transition between the two of them. So again, when you're starting to think about when you're setting up your kind of streaming situation, it might be nice to have kind of a starter screen that looks like this, right? Like similar to what we had in our workshop today. We had that kind of lovely starting image where we began our stream from. And then you might want to transition into some other piece, right? You want to transition to your desktop. You want to transition to another feed, etc. While we're here, let's go ahead and create one more scene. So let's call it scene 3. And here we can do something a little fancier. So in scene 3, let's go ahead and again, select image. You can see that we can select from our existing images. That's very nice. Or we can create a new one. So I'm going to use a new one, and I'm going to call this quad 1. And this is a kind of clear example of a situation that you might run into if you're kind of setting up a kind of teleconference or a kind of virtual conference kind of setup, or even something where you've got mini feeds that you're going to collect. So I'm going to head back to our assets folder. And in our assets folder, I'm going to grab this 480 folder instead. And I'm going to add all 4 of these. We have to do them one at a time, I know, which is a little bit sad. Actually, yeah, let's do this. So I've got 1, great. Okay. I'm going to do another. Let's do quad 2. Quad 2, great. Okay, go back to the same folder, grab our second one. This is where it becomes a little more fun because now we can grab this one and we can start to kind of build a little arrangement, right? Now let's grab another image, quad 3. You can see where this is going, I can tell. So our quad 3, great. We'll browse to an image. This is our 3. All right, wonderful, beautiful. Right, this is similar to the kind of new vibe that's in Fortnite where you can kind of put a bunch of your squad members together. Oops, no, I do not want to remove that. Let's grab another one. Image, quad 4. Okay, we'll browse. And we'll grab our 4th feed. Okay, great. And we'll put it down here at the bottom. Rad. I love this, right? So we can imagine this might be 4 talking heads. And since we've got the time for it, let's go ahead and grab one more image, and let's just use our image 2, I think, since we already have it. So image 2, okay, and we should be able to take our image 2, and let's bring up our properties here. Oops, not our properties. I want our filters. And where's this thing? Come on, you. There we go. We can just drag it to the bottom to put it on the bottom of our stack. Right, so this is a kind of situation where we've got some background video and then we've got some other set of videos over on our left-hand side. Cool. I love it. And again, the kind of interesting piece here is that we can transition between these. So you can imagine, right, there's something where we've got our offline screen or we've got our standby screen. We might transition to just our gameplay footage, or maybe we're going to transition to just our live visual set. And then we have this kind of talking heads on the left-hand side with our content that's running in the background, right? So this could also be a fun way to do like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 kind of setup where you're watching a video together and doing a review or talking about what's working or what's not working. All of those kinds of ideas kind of work in here. The piece that's missing, though, is our audio. So what do we do about our audio? Well, let's go ahead and add some audio sources. So again, we can use our add button over here. I'm going to grab a audio input capture. So I think I want to capture my mic here. There we go. And the device I want to use, I'm going to go ahead and use the same microphone that I'm talking into. So we should be able to see that moving. Great. So there's my audio. Love it. Let's also go ahead and capture an audio output. So our audio output, this would be like our desktop audio, right? And there's a good chance that you'll want to capture some kind of desktop audio at some point. Another kind of situation here that you might run into for audio output would be, you might want to have audio from all 4 of your talking heads that are in here with you, right? So there might be lots of different conversation that you kind of want to gather and bring into this. I'm just going to go ahead and pull up Spotify real fast just to make sure that I've selected the right audio device. So I should hear this. I don't think you'll hear it. I did not select the right audio device. That's good to know. So I'm going to come back to desktop audio. I'm going to go ahead and go to properties. And I think I need the second one instead. So let's make sure. Let's do one more test. Aha, brilliant. So you can see that the audio levels are moving. This is kind of a nice, good thing to do is to check your audio levels, make sure they exist here. And I'm sure that you can start to see and imagine a scenario already here, kind of looking at this, is that there's an awful lot going on in OBS. And right, the thing that you'd want to be able to do is we're going to want to be able to change scenes, kind of move around between these pieces. We're also going to want to be able to do things like turn audio up and down. You want to be able to do all of those kinds of operations from one place like TouchDesigner or whatever your control deck is, rather than trying to think about going back and forth, especially in a scenario where you might have one instance that's capturing all of these pieces and a different instance that's recording and streaming them. It's also helpful to know that we can see over here, there's also this transition. So we can see that you might only have one of these transitions. And if you only have one transition, you can go ahead and grab one of these and add. So for example, I might add my swipe. I'm going to call it swipe and hit OK. I can see a nice little preview. Ooh, so fancy. I know. So now we have different transition types. We've got just a cut scene, right? We just cut from one to the other. We also have this fade. We've got a nice kind of like fade transition between our scenes. And we also have this kind of swipe animation. Again, I know I'm underscoring this a lot. I'm like really kind of like, but this is like, we want to be able to do this. What we want to be able to do is we want to be able to control all of these things without having to go back and forth. And that's exactly the kind of fun stuff that we're going to start to pull apart and look at as we begin our next chapter.